Hey, good evening, folks. I know nobody's here yet because we didn't get an announcement out in time, but let's just babble a little bit and let you all kind of filter in as you get notification that I have gone live. And in the meantime, what I am going to do, I'm going to make sure that everybody out there knows that we are going live right now. And so when you watch this in the replay, this is going to seem a little odd and a little boring at first, but what I'm going to do here right now is just make sure that everybody knows we're here. And I want to talk about something that is a topic that I wrote about a while ago because I had a lot of questions about it. And I wanted to know what the heck was going on. Hey, Roger, how you doing? Ron, good to see you. And Richie, good to see you as well. This is kind of a last-minute change in the schedule. I was going to do Rapscallions with Jeff Dougherty tonight, and we kind of pulled the plug on that for tonight. And I wasn't sure if I was going to come on live or not, so I didn't get a previous announcement out. VJB 1976, how you doing? And so while I'm glad that people are starting to filter in, but let me do this as we're filtering in. I want to let people know that we are live right now. And so bear with me for a second as we're just kind of building up to, I don't know that I can even send a link out on this. So I might not be able to. But let me see, because I waited till the last minute to make my final decision on what I wanted to do. Let's see if I can get a link and put it up over here for people to see. And yeah, I think that ought to work. I'm just going to say right now. And put the link up. And I'm going to add, well, I think that ought to do it right there. Let's see if we can go. So pardon the little boring technical interruptions here while I'm doing this, but I'm going to post this up. And we're going to see if this works. There it is. Yep, right now. Okay. All right, folks. I've got a little topic up that was kind of a last-minute topic. I think we're going to be putting the consequential rapscallions to bed for a while. We keep putting up a notification, and then we keep ending up not being able to do it for one reason or another. And it's going on about 6 weeks since we've done that, Jeff and I. We've been doing that nearly 2 years. Mostly on and off, but I think everybody's schedules have gotten busy enough where it's one of those things that seems to be the easiest thing that gets cut out of the schedule. So if you saw earlier today on Facebook or any of the announcements that we were doing consequential rapscallions, it just kind of, for me, dragged out for about the last moment before I said, okay, I think we're not doing this tonight, and we're moving on to this. So I'm here now. And, Jeff and I may totally revive it, but we have no idea what we're going to do yet. I do want to make a quick announcement that Jeff Dougherty is going to be here in Scotty and Rocky Stucci land next week. We're going to be doing a live broadcast in this spot on Thursday night. That's the 15th of the month. We're going to be, I think we're launching at 8 o'clock. Could be 9 o'clock hour. I'm not sure yet. I believe it's 8 o'clock is what we have on the poster. And Jeff is going to be here, and we're going to be doing a live broadcast remote from a local pub here in southern Minnesota in Hastings, known as the Depot. And Rocky and John Ward and I did a broadcast from there a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now. And so we're going to do that. We're going to be talking about some paranormal things. We may even align that with doing some paranormal stuff. We're not sure. And then Rocky and Jeff and I have planned to very possibly go down to Faribault, if we can fit it into the schedule, where Rocky, John, and I went out in the woods. You've seen some of the films over the years that we've shown as the memory of having done that event. And the three of us. and some of the paranormal activity that we had down there. So we're going to try to do something. We don't have the details in front of us yet. And if we do that, it's going to be next weekend at some point, and we'll be doing some live broadcasts from there. So there it is. It's on the table. Wanted to let you know about that for next week. And also, this show is going to go live on a national network, the Odyssey Radio Network, and it's going to be broadcast all over the nation via several internet network link ups, as well as, I believe, there are 26 terrestrial stations that have the option of carrying it. I don't know if they'll all carry it right away. And I will also simulcast that here. It's going to be a 1-hour show, Monday through Friday, same time, 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. And the general fare of the show is going to be paranormal, the weird. We may get into politics now and then. They're hard to avoid when you have spent your life looking at politics and broadcasting about it. Tonight, right after this show, not immediately after, it all depends on how long we go tonight, at 11 o'clock Central Standard Time, midnight out east, which makes it technically Friday morning, is the Friday installment of The Situation Room. Rocky Stucci and I will be live in about 2 hours, a little less than 2 hours, and so you'll be able to see us there. Audrey, good to see you. Nice to have you here as always. And you're on your way home, so share with everybody, she says. Get your friends on here to watch all 3 shows tonight. And 3 shows. I only know of 2 so far. This show and The Situation Room. So she might have been thinking of Jeff had something going earlier. I'm not sure. So the Consequential Rapscallions has now been kind of put to bed for tonight. And we won't be doing that tonight. So perhaps, maybe, we might be shelving that altogether, Jeffrey Dougherty and I. I think schedules have gotten too busy. And at least that's what I was told. And so with all the busyness going on, that was the easiest one to cut, because Jeff and I really started that thing to not be an in-depth look at anything, but a fun kind of sidebar to our week. And now, of course, you've seen how Jeffrey has grown, how Rocky has grown, how this show has grown a little bit, and how we are becoming pretty full, our schedules. And so I think this might be a night where something was being looked at as something that could be cut out. Hey, Shannon, how you doing? Good to see you. And if I missed any of you, Susie Q, good to see you. Stephanie Hetrick, good to see you. And Ron, I said hi. And Kitten, Michelle, good to see you. Jamie, and everybody else who's here. If I missed you, Brianna, good to see you. And Charlie, good to see you. Glad you made it, brother. And all else, if I missed you, Becky, I see you in there. And so let's continue. I threw up a topic for tonight that we may or may not get to in its full. And this is the thing about my show right now, is what I am doing is I'm converting over from having in the past always talked about politics and thrown in a little paranormal into the mix. Now I'm going to be doing a lot more commentary on, I hate calling it the paranormal, because when that is indeed what it is, it's outside the boundaries of the normal. I think I have started defining it, and others, as the paranormal really isn't all that abnormal. The paranormal is here and now. And I think I'm going to say this. Hopefully nobody out there is too offended by this, but I found the paranormal community to have been a community that not only lends you its ear when you do a show like this and they support you, overall, in general, the paranormal community has become almost a caricature of itself. It's a community that I found when you were on the inside working in it, that it devoured its own. it was a community that became very cannibalistic, one that wanted to have people that were so interested in being in the spotlight that they would, in essence, create division and disunity within that particular community. And it's not that that community really owed unity to anybody else. They were all just out to, it started because everybody was interested in these things. And the more people wanted to be part of more of a, would you call it an entertainment facet of that, which is all radio is too, by the way. Any of the films we do are entertainment on top of, I would say that Rocky, Stucci, and I have not engaged in deep study and research on a scientific level. There are people that do that within the paranormal, but we found interest in it and we took the time to do it. And we broadcast about it and we talked about it. And so within that community, the paranormal, Ron Frisbee says he's triggered, not calling it the paranormal. Uh, I tend to, in my life and in my career, I like to avoid the things that start to look like the things that everybody else is doing. That's been something I've always had a problem with. Now, you know, I do a lot of things in life that look like the rest of the world, or at least the rest of Western civilization. It's not that. It's when you're stepping out and trying to do something different, something better, something that's meaningful, as well as entertaining and informing, then you're constantly barraged with everybody else starting to do the same thing. And or you become one of a crowd because other people are already doing it. And there are varying degrees and levels on this pie chart of people who do it successfully versus people who do it and water down the whole what do you want to call it? They water down the field because they're not really contributing well. They don't know how to contribute well, and it becomes a thing where you're competing almost with yourself. And so there are things where I've started them and I've quit them because they become things that everybody else starts to do. And if they don't do it well, it reflects on you. And so you step away from it for a while. I'm going to step away from that for a while. And I get that. And that's what I did. I stepped away from the paranormal community for a while, for a few years. And now I'm kind of back in it. Without being part of the community, I'm trying to still appeal to some people within it. So if that any of that makes sense, I hope that doesn't sound like double talk to some of you. Maybe some of you get it and you know exactly what I'm talking about. So love all around here, says Lola Joy. That's good to know. I talk to spirits, says Lucky Stone. They talk back. No, that's not normal. Normal is boring. Yeah, that is boring. But here's the question. Can talking to spirits or communing with that other side or recognizing that that other side exists, um, is that paranormal or is that recognizing the normal that is there that we cannot normally communicate with or connect with or find ways to connect with? So, yeah, dipping my toe back in, sort of, Michelle. I've always been there, but I've never really been there as wanting to tout myself as a paranormalist. I try to find different words for it, the semantics of it, so I don't have to say to people, well, I'm into the paranormal. Oh, you're one of those ghost hunters? No, not precisely, but yeah, I've done some of that. You don't want to be associated with the silly side of things or the not well done side of things or the unresearched side of things. You want to align yourself with people who know what they're doing and talking about, as well as present something that is worthwhile. So right now, yeah, I've got my toes back in it kind of light on this show. You'll notice I do stories, talk about things like that. I haven't done a lot of heavy duty research in the last couple of years, and I'll be honest about that. After the open heart surgery and the hip surgeries and the 2 years, I don't camp at that and lay excuses there. I just tired out. My brain tired out a little bit. I tried to keep my face in things and just backed off for a while, and it slowed me down. I had to be very honest that I was slowed down for a while. And I'm really trying to step that back up and get myself back into gear, because sitting and researching was not something my brain would allow me to do very well, and I had to really push myself to do it. So, writing books, things like that, I hadn't tackled any of that over the last 2 years. And doing radio, I totally, almost completely stepped away from that until Rocky invited me to come back and do some radio with him. And good 6, 7, 8 months ago, whatever it was. And so we've been doing this thing now, and I want to keep trying to forge forward to right now. I've got a proposal to finish writing on a new book for my publisher on the Book of Enoch. And so that's going to require the kind of study and research I haven't done in a long time. And I look at things kind of superficially when I have to study them these days. It's kind of the way I treated things in school. Was that you had a big test coming up or something? Oh, I listened pretty well in class, and I didn't take much time studying. I just went with what I retained, and would sometimes look back and flip through the notes to make sure I got the gist of something. So that's kind of where I have been in life the last couple of years, and trying to step back up out of that. Now, all of that is not to say I'm not using what happened to me in physical arenas to say that I've got some excuse for not doing good research. No, I just stepped out of it because of that. So it's getting, yes, when Michelle, when you said putting my toes back into it, that's exactly it. It's getting my toes back into things, feeling the warmth of the water, so to speak, in my own brain, so I could make my brain function on that level. Nigel, how you doing, brother? Good to see you here. Do I have any of the equipment? I have some of the equipment. Rainey and I just happened to pull all that equipment out of a box that was in storage. It's kind of like the Ark of the Covenant put in the wooden crate and rolled back into the big storage warehouse. That's kind of what it felt like, was unboxing that and say, oh, we still have a this, we still have a that, we still have a that. I've noticed, I think there were pieces of my equipment that we loaned out over the last few years that we just don't know where they are anymore. So people gained some equipment. We lost some equipment. There's equipment I'd like to stock up on again. There are things I would like to get to be able to see things and do things and research things. There is also the other side of that, the academic research. For the new book coming up, I've got to research that. Even for the fictional book that I am finishing now, which could still take me a few months to get that done. The 10 Breaths of Ra. I want to make sure that that book, even though it's completely fictional, I don't want it to be a stupid book. Meaning an Egyptologist could pick it up, an historian could pick it up and read it and say, that was a fun romp, and you know what? They got their history right. The Egyptology is correct. Even the theology or the mysticism is right. All of that. And so that's what makes even a fun book like that, which involves a couple of characters that are occult detectives. They become that in this book. And it deals with ancient Egypt, archaeology, history, the supernatural, mummy things, monster things, and all of these different stuff. This different stuff that's the fun stuff of the movies and of good books, but how they interact with them, how those creatures aren't there just for gratuitous throwing in a monster or a mummy sake, but there is something behind it, and the history makes sense, and the esoterics make sense, the magic makes sense. All of these, and one of the characters is Romani, which is the negative word gypsy, if you will, from the Roma, and he is the main character. So I wanted his past to make sense as to what he believes, why he believes and so on, the relatives that he goes to learn things about magics. What did that mean? Was it accurate? So I don't want people to read the book. And the beauty of fiction is it's fiction. You can make shit up. But I don't want to make things up and have them not make sense, if that makes sense to you. So, like a painter, and the book is your canvas. Well, exactly, Charlie. That's it exactly. It's wanting to. All writing is painting pictures with words. This is why I talk so much. In life, I talk a lot. If I'm telling a story to a group of friends or relaying information, I try to not say a bullet point list, but I try to paint a picture. I paint a picture with words because I want that person who is not looking at a picture to be able to look at the words, absorb the words, and say, I've got the whole picture just created in my head. And that's what I like people to see. Exacting standards. Yes, Michelle, that's it. Ron's more of a painter than a writer, he says. And you should see Ron's work. Ron, throw your website or your link up in there if you've got one that people can go look at your artwork. You should see Ron Frisbee's work. I was drawn to him by, I don't know who posted something that was a link to his work, or I just happened to see him. I can't remember how that happened, Ron, just a few months ago. And I was so impressed with his work. I had to go say, hey, can we be friends? I want to get to know you. Does some very impressive work. So yeah, I get that. That's exactly what it's like. So let's see. What else we got going on in here? I'm just looking at things. Can I link my work too? Please do, Nigel. Folks, if you've got work to link up, link it up. I'd prefer that you don't link other people's stuff. Like, oh, you got to go hear this guy I like to listen to on YouTube, and here's his link. I'd prefer you don't do that. If you've got something that you do, link up your link and let us all know what you do. And let's go ahead and I'm perfectly fine with people doing that. Ron's working on his website now. You can find him on Facebook. If you're open to that, Ron, people can go over and find you over there. So this is what I do when I come back into the paranormal and say, okay, I'm going to do a radio show now, a nationally syndicated radio show. I'm going to do politics, but it's not going to be about politics. It's going to be about this other stuff. And there is so much out there in that world. Now, I don't want to just present information without presenting research. So I'm going to also be presenting some of the things I like to research. Tonight, I'm going to get into it in just a little bit here. Now that we've been doing this for almost a half an hour, I want to get into an article that I wrote a while back. So I'm using that as my backdrop, as notes here to go into, and that's Cain and the other people. I've talked about that. I talked about it with the rise and fall of the Nephilim and with the secret history of the reptilians. And it's interesting. I'm going to give you all a bit of a forewarning. I pulled this article out and I have not reviewed it in years. So I'm going to hit this thing and I'm going to kind of go through the points that I put up this. I'm going to talk about it. And where my views have changed a little bit or I've researched something different, I may do that. Some of my base philosophy has changed since the days. I would now ask the question, did Cain even exist? I didn't go that far before. I said, I think these are biblical stories and they may be true accounts. They may be narratives that were created to describe something else. It may just be stories, fictional stories of human origins, the Adam and Eve story, the Garden of Eden story. We all know that Moses, when he wrote the Pentateuch, when he wrote about the Garden of Eden, borrowed a lot of his information from the ancient Mesopotamian stories of about 1,500 years earlier. And I've talked about this before, how Enlil, the chief god of the Anunnaki, became El of the Canaanite peoples, which became Elohim, El Shaddai, El Elyon. How Enki, known as Iyah, became in the Canaanite culture. Iyah became the base word for Yahweh. And Yahweh, of course, is Jehovah. And so how these names transferred from ancient religions and got adapted by newer religions down the road. And I think this is what Moses did when he wrote about the Garden of Eden and he wrote about creation. I got a couple of bugs in here, so I'm going to keep waving my hand like this. They get into the house, and I don't like it. Not one little bit. And so, so this is what really kind of powered this particular story that I wrote about. And this was a piece that I wrote as an article. Then I revamped it and wrote it, and it appeared in a book that was an anthology book with my publisher, New Page Books, along with, I think, different authors wrote for that book. There was like, if I call it up here, hold on, I can tell you what some of these academia. If I go over to my academia page, and by the way, you can do that. You can go to academia.edu, and it's waiting for it for some reason. You know what I need to do? I need to turn off my wireless and just go with my hardwire here. So there it is. All right. So this book was entitled Lost Civilizations and Secrets of the Past. It was an anthology with chapters written by several different authors in this book. Let's see, who else was in this book? There was Eric von Daniken, and you know of him from Ancient Aliens fame on that show. And his book, which came out in 1968, kind of started the whole ancient astronaut process not Ancient Aliens. What was it called? Chariots of the Gods. Philip Coppens, Micah Hanks, Nick Redfern, Marie D. Jones, Larry Flaxman, Thomas Brophy, and others. So these were the guys that were in this particular book. And so so there we go. Oh, I think I also think Jeff Dougherty just came online to do a show as well, to do something. So he's over there. I just got an announcement of some kind. So no, we are not doing the consequential rapscallions tonight. So Jeff is doing his thing. You can stick around here, or you can go over there, whichever you'd like to do. This will be archived either way. And so here we go. So that book was something that came out, and I just wrote one of the chapters for it. And so that's what I want to get into a little bit tonight. And so that is kind of an introduction as to what I've been thinking about all of this. Why I am doing the things I'm doing in the paranormal, the kind of stuff I want to bring to the table with the new radio show. That's going to be something here that I talk about a little bit tonight. And I have this article in front of me that I wrote several years ago now and expanded on it, as I've already mentioned, in two different books. And it's The Other People. I called it Cain and the Other People. And it's a biblical, historical mystery of ancient civilization is what this book was. And it ended up being a chapter in that anthology book. And one of the raging questions that I was dealing with this was in archaeological and anthropological circles nowadays. It's been this question revolving around the whole origins of humankind. Where did we come from? On one side of that debate, you've got the religious camp that insists quite dogmatically that ancient man descended from a singular active supernatural creation. And on the other side of that, and many times in diametric opposition to the religious camp, you've got that scientific community that insists that humanity ran through a chain of evolutionary stages of ascendancy, plateauing in our current state of evolution and development, where we are today. Are we evolved? Well, according to science, we've evolved at least to this point. Are we still evolving? Probably. But evolution is this long process of mutation and adaptation. So, but there's a third distinctive camp I want to talk to you about. And that's this thought that revolves around this whole alternative theory that humans are a race interrupted. Remember that? What do you think about that? Are we a race interrupted? That somewhere in our primordial past, we experienced this genetic alteration, and it was so abrupt and it was so swift as to alter the course of Homo sapien development in an indiscernible blip of a moment on the great scale of linear time. And it breaks these ties with the laws of the evolutionary process and natural ascendancy, and certainly with theology. And so there's this stuff that happened that, yeah, Roger asks, is there a point where we ever start to regress? That's a good question. Have we regressed? I don't know. I don't think we've regressed. I think we are probably, there's no way to know, frankly, is the easy answer to that, to Ron. The easy answer to that, Roger. I don't know. I still don't even know that we have actually evolved to where we are. Perhaps we were created as this, and the only evolution is the evolution metaphorically, or in the lighter use of the word, we evolve our minds. Do we evolve during our lifetime? Do we evolve from being one thing to another? Is gaining of intelligence, gaining of rationale and reason, developing that, gaining wisdom even, is that a process of evolution within our lifetime? That we evolve from this to something better, hopefully something better? That's a question we have to ask. And I have said many times that evolution, it's funny. We've got all these stages of evolution which have been identified by science. Now, think about this for a second, folks. Stages of evolution. We've got everything from Australopithecus over here to, I don't know what the next one was, and the next one up to Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon, modern man, all these different stages of evolution. Now, the problem with this is that all of those stages, science has identified, but they haven't really linked any of those stages together. There's the problem. Are we looking at one species that has evolved over millions of years? Or are we looking at millions of years worth of different species that science has randomly been able to put together to say, I think these are all linked? So to show, so there is the big question when they talk about the theory of evolution as it pertains to humankind. It's still a theory because it has not been proven that we come from Australopithecus. It has not been proven that Australopithecus came eventually from primordial slime. We don't know that. This is the theory. This is the working theory. And so all these stages of ascendancies, we don't know if they're linked or not. And science has not been able to link them. So they keep talking about the missing link. They came up with some discovery a few years back now. They said, here is the missing link. And it really wasn't. It was just another species that they claimed was something that was an intermediate species between two. But there was no way to link them. Now, I don't have an axe to grind. Doesn't matter to me how we got here. I want to know, but it doesn't matter to me. If we evolved from lower species of primates, that's fine. I do know that we share a large percentage of our DNA with primates, but then again, so do a lot of other animals. And so that's not giving you facts right there because I don't have those facts right in front of me to state statistics, but I've seen this. I was in a debate with an evolutionary biologist, and I stated that, and his audience made up about 300 of the people in the audience, and they all were laughing me and would like to have run me out on a rail for saying that. Oh, he's using that typical answer. And I said, seriously, I said, you're laughing about it. I said, but can anybody here, even you, the evolutionary biologist, tell me that that link has been made? And it hasn't. And then I said, I'm not trying to prove the opposite happened. I'm not saying God came down and created it all in 7 days. I said, what I am saying is you haven't proven your case. So how do I know you're any smarter than the theologian who came up with his story? I said, we just don't know, do we? I said, but we have an idea. We're heading in the right direction. We keep trying to find that answer. And so some of you out there, you want to know, but you got no horse in the race. I don't care, frankly, if God created me, if he created this race, if biology just happened, if we are a planet that is inhabited today by people who it was an accident that it happened, so what? What does that do? If there's an accident here, you know what that means? Could have been an accident many other places. As a matter of fact, my wife has one of my kids out tonight to a big science thing here at the library where they've got the big telescopes and they're going to be looking at the stars tonight. My two little girls are up in bed, but she took Flynn to that because you're going to be looking at galaxies up there. And as I've talked before, they found that the universe is filled, as far as we can see, with exponential billions of galaxies like the Milky Way galaxy that we are part of. And if there is exponential billions of galaxies that are filled with exponential billions of solar systems, what is the ratio to the possibility of having life like ours or similar to ours out there somewhere? I think it's pretty high. So is that a product of evolution? Is it a product of creation? We don't know for sure. So let me get back to this article. The notion of ancient alien interruption in the lifeline or the line, the ascendancy of humans was that third option I presented. It's not a new one. It's purveyors such as Von Daniken, Drake, Downing, Sagan, even Sitchin have been writing and theorizing on the topic for decades. And ever since early humans first gazed up in wonder at a star-blanketed night sky, we were intrigued by what we saw and the seemingly unanswered questions of a mysterious, unattainable universe that was just right there. It's right above our heads. We were intrigued by this. We were intrigued by its unexplained mysteries. And early mythologies and legends give the circumstantial evidences of mysterious objects that roared across the heavens, things that we didn't understand and did not know how to explain. And so these myths were made up about them. These shards of ancient tablets that have been found, shreds of ancient documents, they all describe this phenomenal, unexplained manifestation in the skies. And virtually every culture and religion relates visitations from angels, from demons, from devils, from gods who visited mankind in ancient times. And mankind in its infancy, we're talking way back, described these visitations from the sky in the only terms they could understand. Of course, these were all deities. And now this was the basis back when I did a little more ancient alien, for lack of a better way, alienist theorizing, or let's call it musing, because a theory generally requires a scientific hypothesis and one that you start to research. I don't know that I've developed a hypothesis on this or anybody really, but the notion, the idea, the musing that we have come from alien seeding and things like that is stuff that gets quickly put down by the scientific community because they say, well, that's just a notion. It's just an idea. It's not really a hypothesis because a hypothesis requires certain things. And so Lucky says evolution bacteria, easy. Finches, easy. Some squirrels easy. Dogs, humans, not so much. So yeah, there you go. So as we start looking at these things, there are lots of questions that we have. Now, science, there are not there are veils that science has not yet pierced and will probably ever and always be unable to pierce. Is there a scientific way to prove that a God exists? I don't know. If there is, we haven't discovered that yet. We haven't discovered the theological, scientific roots of humanity, of our planet. We haven't visited there, so we don't know. So there's this resultant, even larger questions that loom out there, that once you've crossed this great chasm that lies between accepted trains of scientific or religious thought, is the question of civilizations buried so far back in the historical record as to modify our current data on the history and the rise of human civilization. And the young earth creationists are one that drive me insane, by the way. They're like the flat earthers now. When I first wrote this, the flat earth thing wasn't a big gig out there, so I didn't even mention that in this article. But the young earth creationists are going to tell you that the biblical record accounts for an earth history that is a mere 6,000 to 7,000 years old. Now, if somebody were to ask you, how old is the planet? What would you tell them? What have we been taught? Have we been indoctrinated to believe it is billions of years old? Have we been indoctrinated to believe theologically it was created by God in 7 days? And I understand the young earth creationists. They are people who believe by faith that God is the author of creation. Not just an evolutionary creation, but that God created things in the literal 7 days, that the Bible 6 days actually, and he rested on the seventh. That this is the truth of the universe. And young flat earth, insert astrology joke here. Exactly, Iowa. So probably in the same room with all the comrades and points of personal privilege. Very well, probably could be, Roger. So we look at these questions and say, can I immediately dismiss the 6,000 to 7,000 year old theory? Sure. I think we can prove that the Earth is a lot older than that. But then, of course, they bring in the theory that when God created it, he created a mature planet. And I would just simply ask, why? Why would he do that? Why did he want to make a 7,000-year-old rock look as if it's aged for 1,000,000 years? Those are the questions I had. But I understand their faith, and perhaps some of them have sincerity in what they believe. But I also see the young earth creationist theory as being people who are desperately maintaining their faith belief as opposed to seeking the truth of a matter. And so while science long ago established this vastly older history that's of human ascension, going back at least 200,000 years with humanity in our current state, from the beginning of modern man. That's the beginning of modern mankind, not the ancient past. The recent discovery of ancient temple complexes, such as Göbekli Tepe, near the village of Karapinar in Turkey, dates back 12,000 years BCE. So what do you do with that date if the planet is only 6,000 to 7,000 years old? How can we have 12 to 14,000 year old temples that we have uncovered? And this has turned the established nomenclature on its ear. The city building humanity nomenclature has been turned upside down. And so this really is where we begin to question some of the theological things. A young earth creationist, I could put them to bed pretty easily in a debate. But because I find them perhaps relying too much on wanting to maintain the literal facet of Lucky says humans have a common ancestor, and we find the links to common ancestor in chimpanzees. Human ancestors are just a weird staircase and guesses and theories. You're exactly true. If your path leads you to not question anything, says Topper, then you're likely on the wrong path. And that's very true as well. So there's no ancestor to humans that looked anything like chimpanzee, says Lucky, and she's right. So this is where the questions come in. So let's look at something here as I move on in this particular article. Creation in the first family. Let's look at the theological side of this. If you take the biblical story and start dissecting it to lay bare all the internal organs, the skeletal structure is this meticulously important process necessary in an understanding of ancient culture. So simply said, the Bible, for all of its gloriously revered tales of Jehovah God and his interactions with his human creation, spawning three of the world's major religions, the Abrahamic religions, is a source point for understanding the ancient anthropology of humanity. Now we're talking on an anthropological level here, not an evolutionary level. Depending on your view of the veracity of biblical scripture, there's no shadow of doubt that its pages reveal stories, accounts, myths, legends, and fables that mirror or are mirrored by, hi there, my wife and son are back from telescoping out there. How was it?
Awesome. We got to see Jupiter and its rings and the moon.
Cool.
We got to see
Jupiter's rings, did you say? Saturn's rings.
We got to see Jupiter and 3 moons.
Here, come here for a second. Here, let my wife tell you all of you who are watching. This is what they got to do tonight.
Yeah.
So
we got to go stargazing at the library. They had the whole rocket to reading was their theme for the summer, and Flynn and I went and got to see the moon up close with binoculars, which was awesome.
That's cool.
I didn't know you could see what you could see.
That's pretty darn cool.
Just binoculars. And then they had a huge telescope. And we got to see Jupiter and the moons.
And the moons.
Of them and the moons. Well, I got to think now. And Saturn. I saw one of the moons, even though it has like 69.
Nice.
And then we saw the rings. It wasn't like, couldn't see all the different rings. It was just like one giant blob of white ring, but it's still cool.
Very cool.
A golden star.
Right on.
Good times.
Right on. So that's what my family, I was just talking about that a few minutes ago. Then you peeked your head in. So they're back.
I'm letting you know I was home.
All right. So there you have it, folks. How would you like to have a mom like her? She sets all this stuff up for you and takes you. So
it's rockets next week. We're making rockets at the library.
Gonna make rockets. I might make it to that one. So I used to have a big telescope, by the way. See you guys. I used to have a big telescope here at the house. It's in storage right now, so I still have it, I guess. And what was so very cool was the first time we looked up at the moon, and it brought it so close we couldn't keep it in focus. You'd watch it and you'd see the moon and its craters, and it's moving like this across the view of the scope. And we had to keep moving the scope to see things. And we saw the rings of Saturn, and we saw Jupiter and things like that. So it's very cool. I didn't see Elon's car. I don't know if they did. So I've got a very big telescope. My telescope's bigger than others. So some people have very small telescopes. So anyway, let's move on. And I just thought, since she stuck her head in and this is my broadcast and I do whatever the hell I want with it, I'd say come on over and have her tell you what she was up to, since I mentioned it earlier this evening. So this whole thing, the importance of the Bible, if not for faith and practice, is to see it as a book that really demonstrably demonstrates, is what I'm trying to say, another facet of events as experienced and recounted by ancient mankind. Now, we know that we can unindoctrinate ourselves from some of the theological teachings that just aren't so, but the book still stands as something that was written about a faith, and there are things in it that I think are efficacious. And accordingly, if you're Judeo-Christian, you're Muslim, religious heritage, the pages of these religious texts and the biblical scripture are truth to you. According to certain Christian denominations, the Bible is the only authority for faith and practice. This is what we were taught in the Baptist church and in my conservative fundamentalist Baptist education. And while that may or may not be true, it's clear that when one takes a step back from the text of the Bible, removing the sometimes rose-colored glasses of dogma and systematic theology, and I won't even say sometimes anymore, the all the time rose-colored glasses of dogma and systematic theology, you can start to read between the lines, and you can start to see, as it were, this vastness of the world kind of flickering between the slats as you walk by and along the perimeter fence of one of the world's most holiest of books, what it's always been considered to be. Now, we have this tendency nowadays, and Jeff, as much as I respect him, Jeff Dougherty, I think we all fall into the danger of devaluing the book as meaningless. Now, I don't know that Jeff does that, but Jeff is very hardline on wanting to make sure what the words say and what they mean. And I'm a firm believer of that as well. But at the same time, the Bible itself has its own intrinsic value as well. There are efficacious points of the Bible that we need to hang on to. They may not be things for eternal salvation. They may not be for the sake of science and understanding the universe, but there are a lot of other efficacious points there. And so when we say unindoctrinate yourself, this is something we all have to engage in, is detaching a bit from something we were told was so, without really understanding what it really says or what it really means or why it is so. So most of us grew up learning all these spiritual stories about the creation of the world. And most of us are familiar with that first couple, Adam and Eve. We learned about this, Adam and Eve and the snake in the garden and the apple, which the Bible never says is an apple, and a piece of fruit. But we've come to put that picture in our heads. And through the medium of felt cutout storyboards, dioramas in our childhoods, we were taught that God commanded the first man and the woman to not eat of a specific tree in the Garden of Eden, lest they die. And how subsequently Eve was tempted by the serpent to eat this forbidden fruit that was presented to her, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And thus she bringing that fateful bite to her teeth and her lips, the introduction of sin came into the world, and we all became a fallen race of mankind outside the favor of a holy God. And the Genesis couple was then ushered from paradise after this, and they were given the command to, well, now that I've kicked you out of paradise, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth with offspring, who will all, by the way, be born with an intrinsic, hereditary, genetic, theologically genetic sin nature, and all be hell-bound. So the first two children were Cain and his twin brother Abel, and the start of a vast, wide, sinful, separated from God civilization began. So something about Hillary, not Hillary, Pelosi. Rocky would spoon with anybody. He'd totally spoon with Eve. Yeah, I could see that happening. Rocky, you want fronts or backs with Eve? So I know the serpent did it. Or is that just a metaphor? Rocky and his serpent spooned with Eve. And Rocky said, surely gag, I hope so. Somebody said. Oh, I see where that is. Let's see. So, dude, spoon on, spoon, or there is no spoon. So which one is it? So, now there are many world cultures that have these varying accounts of the creation in the first family. some of which border on that fairy tale sort of scenario, such as gods or great human warriors casting beasts and animals into the skies to create the great swath of heavenly constellations. Rocky will like this one. It's like, one of the Native American tales that speaks of, and the great spirit cast the great beaver into the sky, and the great beaver birthed forth all the stars in the heavens. And that's why we have the constellations today. You put Rocky spooning and great beavers and snakes and all of that together, and you'll see where I'm going with that narrative. Maybe Rocky and I will pick that up tonight. I don't know. The African and Native American accounts of creation share a vast amount of similarities, commonalities, such as subterranean humans coming to the surface of the earth, gods from the heavens impregnating their beautiful daughters with quadruplets. And for example, in Lakota accounts of the first human family, whoops, I just lost my place in my own notes. In these Lakota accounts of the first human families, you've got the people. It's why I always have to trouble pronouncing these. Waziah and Wakanka are the from the Native American, the Lakota tale. Here, let me get back up there in my notes here, and there it is. Waziah is the old man and his wife Wakanka. They came out into the world from underground. They came squinting in the bright sunlight from the subterranean existence underground. They gave birth to Ite, I-T-E, Ite. And she was a daughter that was so beautiful that she captured the attentions of Tate, T-A-T-E, or Tate if you looked at it. Tate, the god of the wind. And he married her and he fathered quadruplets with her. That's 4, if you can't figure out what that is, instead of twins. So she gave birth to a small litter, quadruplets. And in this account, we're told of a character, Iktomi, and he was the trickster. He tempted the first family with promises of great wealth, of power, of beauty. Iktomi bears great resemblance to the Old Testament's accounts of the serpent in the garden, the tempter, the seducer. He appeared as a snake, tempting Eve in the Garden of Eden, and he promised eternal life and knowledge like that of the gods if she ate of the forbidden tree of the garden's center. And as with the Lakota tale of Waziah, Wakanka and Ite, disobedience, treachery against the god and the gods resulted in banishment from paradise for all of them. It's the serpent in the garden, or Lucifer, if you will. I don't think Lucifer was at all the character that we see in the garden, but that's what we were taught. And as a matter of fact, you don't see, and if you haven't heard me say this many, many times in some of the things I've written and we've talked about, the serpent in the garden is never in the text called Satan or the devil or Lucifer. It was over 1,000 years later that some of the writings, even the biblical writings, started referring to the serpent in the garden as Lucifer or as a Satan of any kind. He's not referred to that in the text. He's known as Nakosh, and this goes into the whole Elohim issue. And so it's Lucifer, or Nakosh, if you will, and his Lakota counterpart, Iktomi, were cursed. They were exiled to the earth for all time. And while the first families went on to bear children and spread throughout all the earth. And it's very interesting to note that while Waziah and Wakanka came out from underground, that in the Genesis account, Adam was formed out of the clay of the ground. He came out of the ground. The similarities in cultural versions of creation are really clearly evident when you start making comparisons between them. And you've got to read between the lines and look at language and see how things were written. Adam was formed out of the clay. Wakanka and uh, Waziah, were came out of the ground, out from under the ground. So all these varied cultural tales of creation have a vast number of similarities and overlaps that the touch points create this tangled web of scientific methodology established more by crossovers in the myths of various cultures rather than the veracity of individual cultural tales. Let me repeat that because I want you to get that. There's kind of an ad hoc um, scientific mythology that takes place here when you start having comparatives between all these different unrelated, untouching each other ancient cultures that come up with their tales that are all pretty similar. This means something on a scientific methodological level. This to me would say they all had an original source point, or they either all began with one story, or a bunch of people got together in ancient times from different cultures and compared notes, or they borrowed and stole from more ancient tales, which is like what I think Moses did. Prometheus formed man of clay, and Athena added the soul, according to the Greeks. And of course, that makes me think of in Jewish tradition, the golems. You could create a man out of clay, and there was a place in the heart to for the blessing to be inserted, written down, that could bring it to life, the spell, so to speak. So in the Genesis account of Adam and Eve, the fall of all mankind was a direct result of what? According to the biblical tale, disobedience. People ask, why was all of humanity cursed for all time? Because Eve took the bite of a piece of fruit. Now, it's because the biting into the fruit by Eve, which, by the way, is never identified as an apple, as I said before, that wasn't the issue. The issue, it is said, was her direct disobedience to a command mandated by the superior divine being. As a result of her violation, and then her luring her husband, Adam, to share in the disobedience, the fall of man came hammering down with eternal, historical, devastatingly permanent effect. But after the events of creation and the fall of mankind in the Garden of Eden, it seems that the story begins to morph into events that could conceivably take on a more historical form than we might have thought. And Jeannie Griffin, I see you say something here that I'm going to show it. The snake is giving the truth, whereas God, the rat bastard, is attempting to put the wool or pull the wool, the sheep over your eyes. No sin. It's a BS. It's a psyop. Now, I've listened to Jeff as much as any of you, and Jeff and I have had our conversations, and I've been studying these things for years, trying to understand how much of it I want to accept and how much of it I want to get rid of. And that was the slower process for me, was divesting myself of the indoctrination that I had received. And so when I look at these stories and I ask, was man originally sinful? Jeff has worked out a complete theology nearly of his own on this, and I respect what he's done. I don't agree with him on every point, but I respect the time and the research and the effort he puts into this. And we pretty much kind of come to similar types of conclusions. Mine, you've heard me espouse in different ways here on this show and on different shows that I do, and the books that I write, and so on. So the big question for me is really, is this something that was created? Is this biblical account real? Is it a metaphor for something else that happened? What actually happened is the question. And we've got to morph these events into something more historical. The whole notion of a fallen man that is all fallen because of the acts of two people. One people, really. It was Eve who did something, but then the fall of man was the responsibility of Adam's. Why? Because God made Adam the head of Eve and Adam, of the couple. He was the head. So while he didn't commit the actual act, she did. Then she gave it to him, and he ate of it. Poof, what does the Bible say? They were immediately realized they were naked, and that there was some problem there. Now, the problem I have with this too, if you just take the myth to break it down, um, this looks like with the introduction of Nakash, the serpent character in this story, one of the Elohim, I believe, and we're not talking about that so much detail tonight, so I'm not going to get into it all. But what he did was he created in this couple. How would I say this? Other than just to be plain English about it, I think what you're looking at is an encoded message of a sexual three-way that took place. Nakash introduced sex to the first couple, and this, of course, is within the context of the biblical mythology. That this myth is really an encoded tale of sexual activity, where Nakash introduces sex to Eve, impregnates her, she brings it to Adam. Adam impregnates her, she bears twins, Cain and Abel. One is fathered by Nakash, the Elohim, the other is fathered by Adam, the human man. And this, I think, is also a metaphor, not a metaphor, a word picture, very probably of race interrupted, perhaps the seeding of mankind and so on. But we can get into that. That's a totally different discussion here, because what I want to look at, all of this has been the introduction to what I want to talk about, and that is Cain and the other people. Remember Cain, the whole my brother's keeper issue. According to the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve gave birth to these two sons, naming them Cain and Abel. And Cain was the elder and Abel was the younger. And like other biblical passages, it talks about Jacob and Esau being twins, and how Jacob stuck his hand out of the womb first, and the midwife tied a red cord around his hand because he's the firstborn, because the hand went back and then Jacob came. Well, then Esau came. So Esau was first. So the whole idea of twins, and twins being fathered by two different fathers in a woman and coming out as twins, fraternal twins, is a medically understood fact. This can happen. And now the passage isn't clear, even in the Hebrews, when it talks about this account in the Bible, whether Abel was born as a second child years later, or whether, like the African and Lakota creation myths, this was a multiple birth. But Cain and Abel, according to the verbiage of the text, were most likely twins. And this also coincides with all those other mythologies of first families in creation. Almost every one of them show the human woman mothering multiples. They were twins, triplets, quadruplets, quintuplets even. And the biblical story, I think, should be no differently understood. And as the story goes, Cain was a tiller of the ground. He was a farmer, a husbandman. He grew things. He grew vegetables, and important to the survival of his family, and which we don't know if he had one yet. It could be a contribution to Adam and Eve and he and his brother. So remember, the Bible says specific things. The text we were taught meant something. The words mean something. And if there were more than these four people at the beginning of creation, at the time of these stories, the text would have spelled that out. But it doesn't. It doesn't mention the presence of anybody else. It talks about Cain and Abel, and his twin brother Abel. He was a sheep herder. He raised meat for the same purpose. And as they went to worship their creator, Abel killed and burned a sheep on the altar to appease his God, who wanted a blood sacrifice. And Cain did the same thing. He took the first fruits of all the stuff he grew, and he burned those on the altar. But God rejected Cain's offering, while Abel's offering of blood and death and meat, that this was a sweet savor to the nostrils of God. It was the bloodletting It was the bloody God that required blood. That was the acceptable sacrifice. And the sheep, as biblical scholars have said, represented the killing of a living thing that emitted blood, the life-flowing fluid of the body. And it was considered to be life itself. Life is in the blood. And the process of sacrifice was meant to be a precursor later to the coming kinsman redeemer, the Messiah, the Christ, the one, the light. The Christ is the Greek version of the word. Jesus is simply the Hellenized version of Joshua or Iesu. This is the same name. Jesus is the same name, Joshua, in different languages. Joshua was Hebrew, as well, and Jesus was Hellenized Greek, which came later in the writings. And remember, the Bible was written in Koine Greek, because what had Alexander the Great done? He had Hellenized the world, and the language of commerce was Greek. So most of your New Testament was written in Hellenized Greek or Koine Greek. And there are segments in Aramaic. I don't think there is Hebrew in the New Testament, if memory serves. Aramaic and Koine Greek. And so what you've got in like names like Jesus, a Hellenized name for Joshua, Iesu, Yeshua, Jesus' name probably being something in Hebrew like, excuse me, like Yeshua Bar Yosef, Joshua the son of Joseph. And you see, and theology was added in the Gospels and some of these different books. And so the lifeblood, Nigel says, Enki, the Christ of Sumer, Viracocha, the Christ of the Andes, and Manu, the Christ of India. Well, exactly. That's what you've got. And so without this being a study into all of that, and we may not even 10:17, we'll see how far we get here. I thought I was going to be bing, bang, boom, done and out with this one tonight. But and so this blood was considered to be the life itself. And it was supposed to be became, as time rolled on, the symbol of something, the Christ, the kinsman redeemer, the light bringer, the Messiah. So something he was supposed to eventually do was shed his blood for the remission of sins, which I think was a creation of Christianity. He carried the tabernacle and the temple worship in Jerusalem. And while Cain's offering was from the heart, it was not what apparently was prescribed or necessary to please Jehovah. God, and it's not Jehovah at this point, it's still Elohim. And it's very interesting that Elohim could come down, could communicate with his created beings, but they did nothing to hinder the upcoming savage murder of Abel. The creator, Elohim, came down and could talk to the future murderer Cain, but he didn't do anything as recorded in the passage to warn Abel. This has earmarks of mythology. While this is a subjective observation, it's pretty noteworthy that there was such an incredible physical, audio, visual interplay. Yet the only thing God did to assuage Cain's anger prior to the murder was to warn him that he needed to cool his jets and not give sin an opportunity to take hold of him. He said nothing that we can see in the passage to the unwitting Abel. So here is Cain, who brought the sacrifice that wasn't the right kind, and God didn't like it. And so Cain became angry that his sacrifice wasn't accepted, but his brother's was. God was pleased with Abel's sacrifice. Yet we have no recorded passage in this biblical myth that says God said squat one to Abel, but he came down and told Cain, don't be angry. Sin lies at the door. I know what's in your heart. Don't do it. It says right here in the passage in Genesis 4, God said to Cain, why are you angry? What's your face? Why is your face downcast? If you do what's right, you'll be accepted. But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you have to rule over it. So this is the lesson that was being taught in that passage. Yet we don't see him saying anything to Abel like, Abel, watch out. Your brother's really pissed off, and he's considering killing you in cold blood. So why don't you step back a little bit? Mind your P's and Q's. Now here's God, who kicked them all out of the garden, who showed Adam and Eve how to make garments out of animal skins to clothe themselves, taught them agriculture. But when it came to murderous intent and murdering, he talks to the murderer to be, but doesn't talk to the guy to help protect him. He doesn't come down and show them what it meant to not murder somebody, to not act this way. So this is where the myth, without getting into linguistics, starts breaking down. And so this myth breaks down right away. And God's not a vegan. There it is. God's like, I want lamb shank. You bring me carrots and cucumbers? So yeah. So let's see. No, it's unfortunate. Ship happens, the pun's intended. All right. So here we have the warning. This is a warning to not let to Cain to not give in to his emotions. Don't let them run away with you. But then there's the harsh judgment from the same creator who talked with him face to face. Consider what it'd be like as you pass through life and process and proceed through life if the creator of the universe interacted with you on this personal basis, telling you to be careful of this or careful of that. He made clothes for your mom and dad. He showed you how to plant things. He showed you how to hunt and how to raise it, but he didn't tell you anything about the interpersonal relationships involved, how to not murder somebody and so on and so forth. What did that mean? He just called it sin in this passage. Don't give in to sin, he said. Cain must have held this special place in the eyes of God because we don't read anything of the same sort of interaction between God and Abel. Now, does that mean it didn't happen in the story? No, it just means it's not mentioned. It wasn't found important enough to mention in the story. Even as a story, they omitted that. And Cain must have held a special place for God because he was warned to not let sin take him over, while Abel didn't hear a word about protecting himself from his brother's anger. According to this passage, God's human creation was in such infancy that the rudiments of committing murder and then the seeming inability to grasp its consequences tells the tale of a very young creation, a very young civilization with very little experience in dealing with really the harsh realities of human interaction, such as murder. Yet for some reason, God kept focusing on Cain. Maybe, and I'll speculate within the context of the theology. Maybe he said, Abel's got it okay. He's okay. He doesn't need my help. Cain's the guy I got to focus on because he's the one that's going to commit this heinous act. And so as the story goes, Cain, still in jealousy of his twin brother's position with God, and in anger over his own rejection by the deity, took the brother out in the field and murdered him. Boom, gone. Now, does that sound like somebody who's very stable? How old were these guys? Were they hundreds of years old by now? Were they 2 days old? Well, no, they said they tended sheep and they planted things. So they're at least a season or two old, I'll bet you, to do these things. Did they have families? Who did they marry? Did they have children? They're not mentioned in these passages. Only Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. And that Cain killed his brother because he was pissed off that God liked his brother's stuff better than his. But God came to him ahead of time. If the God of the universe who created you, created your parents not long ago, you're just like one generation off from being formed out of the dust of the ground. And God says, you really shouldn't kill your brother. Don't think about that. What are you going to do? You're going to go, whatever. So who told Cain? Was it God? Was it? So the passage falls apart for me. The story falls apart for me because it's not a complete story. So there's cause and effect, and there's a consequence to this first murder. When God asked Cain about the incident and the whereabouts of Abel, Cain uttered that famous question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" He says, "I don't know where he is. Am I my brother's keeper?" And as a result, God branded Cain with a mark and banished him from the region of Eden to wander as an exile the rest of his days. And in the meantime, we're told that Adam and Eve bore their third son, Seth. And Eve held him up as a replacement from God for her murdered son. So this is the Genesis account of the aftermath of Cain's murder of Abel. And I'm going to stop here for tonight because it's already just about 10:30. So let's talk about this for just a second. And I want to see some of your feedback on this. You've got this first family, according to the scriptural tale, for which we have deemed theologically that the Bible itself is specific, it's explicit. This is what we were taught. Words mean things, the language means things. And in the language of this passage, we don't see that there is anybody on earth at this point other than Adam, Eve, and their two sons, Cain and Abel. If they were married to other people, who were these other people? Would they be, the speculation, of course, theologically as well, obviously, Adam and Eve had other kids. And this is many years later. And that sisters and cousins and second cousins were all existing now. There was a civilization established under Adam and Eve as at the head of the tree, the family tree. And yet, nowhere in the passage in this story is it mentioned that there were other people that were brothers, sisters, or cousins. It doesn't mention that they had wives until after these events, which we'll get into tomorrow. What you've got is you've got a story of creation that says there were four people and that the two sons, one was at odds with the other because the God that created them didn't accept his sacrifice. And so because he was pissed off about this, he murdered his younger brother. And God comes and asks him, "Where's your brother? Abel, hey, Abel." And Cain's like, no, don't call for him. God's like, "Abel, where's your brother? Where's your brother? Tell me." Of course, implying that he already knew. And what's Cain's answer? He says, "I don't know where my brother is. Am I my brother's keeper?" He says, "To God." Now start getting the picture of what happened there. God ousted Adam and Eve from the garden. God taught them how to eat, how to get their food, taught them how to make clothes out of skins, taught them how to plant things. Maybe he did that already, because it said one of their tasks was to till the garden and keep it for him in paradise. And so maybe they already had an idea of how to do this, but God had to make clothes for them because they were naked. Then they had kids because of sex. Eve bears these twin sons, Cain and Abel. One who is the son of Nakosh, the Elohim, the serpent character in the garden. The other who is the son of Adam. So there was this divine three. And this comes out later. I talked about it when we talked about Nephilim and we talked about the reptilians, those two books, and laid out the history. Everything that happens in the genealogical record as recorded in the Bible mentions it doesn't go through the firstborn Cain, it goes through the thirdborn Seth to go back to Adam. Why? Because Abel's gone. Abel had no living children, according to the scriptural passage, because the genealogies weren't taken through the son of Abel. And if he did have them, he wasn't the firstborn. So he couldn't pass on that firstborn issue. Cain was the firstborn. But the Bible tells us he went on to have sons with his wife later. But why isn't he mentioned in the genealogy? Why does it go to the thirdborn of Adam and Eve, Seth, as the head of the genealogy after Adam, which carried the line all the way to Abraham or Noah, which carried the line to Abraham, which carried the line to David, which carried the line to the birth of the Messiah in Christianity? That there's this unbroken line, but they all trace the firstborn. Why then was Cain omitted from that firstborn list? He lived. The Kenites were his descendants. They're mentioned in the biblical texts. So why was his bloodline ignored? I believe it's because his bloodline was the bloodline of Nakash. This is that Elohim bloodline. And the Elohim, by the way, when you look at them linguistically, there are trains of thought that say the Elohim, the sons of God who came down and intermingled with the daughters of men, had children by them, the Genesis 6 passage. They explain that away as these were just humans, the sons of the aristocrats who built the school of the prophets, and that the sons went down literally into the valley, slumming with the common women, and had children by them, that this was the Elohim. Yet there is a contrast. Once again, language means something. I don't have it in front of me here, but the daughters of men, the word for daughters, I don't remember the Hebrew word. I have to go look it up. But she was the daughters of men were impregnated by the sons of God. This is in the English. You go back into the Hebrew, the B'nai Ha Elohim, and the daughters of Adam. Adam being mankind. Elohim being something completely different. The contrast was there. Why did these sons of God, or the sons of Elohim, of the Elohim, came down and intermingled with the daughters of humans? The stark contrast in the linguistically in these two sets of peoples is what tells you what was going on. So if Cain is indeed encoded message, is the son of Nakash, one of the Elohim, and Abel is the son of Adam, you've got a completely human-blooded kid, and then you've got a son who is really part God. He's like a demigod. He is like Zeus was the father of Hercules type of thing. And that Eve bore somebody who was half God or half Elohim, half human, and also the second son, Abel, who was all human. So now with Abel gone, and the line of the kinsman redeemer needed to be traced through all the genealogies through the whole Old Testament, why couldn't they go back to the firstborn kid, Cain? It's because Cain was not fully human. They had to go back to the thirdborn son, Seth, and follow his bloodline. So why didn't they go back to Abel's kids? Because Abel didn't have any kids. Why'd they go to the thirdborn instead of the firstborn? Because the firstborn was not fully human. This is where you get that. So this is that story that's being set forth now. Now, God kicked them out, taught them all these things. Why does God come down and speak to Cain and warn him, don't be pissed off. Don't kill your brother. Sin's at the door. I know it's in your heart. Don't kill your brother. We don't see him going, Abel, your brother wants to kill you. Be careful. And then after the murder, am I I don't know where my brother is. Am I my brother's keeper? And God comes back talking to Cain again after the murder. Now, what's this special relationship that Cain in the story has with God? That God kept talking to him. God didn't teach him about murder. God taught him about sin. Don't be sinful. Sin lies at the door. Okay, don't be sinful. I got stuff to do now. Don't kill your brother. Then he kills him, and he comes back and he goes, where's your brother? Well, I killed him. Well, I told you not to do that. So God places a mark on him so people would not kill him. So he protects the murderer. Later, this whole scenario was something, according to the Mosaic law, that God said, if you kill a man, your life shall be taken, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and so on. So why was God lenient with Cain? Well, Cain, yeah, he killed his brother, and later I'm going to tell you guys you have to take a life for a life, but I'm just going to put a mark on him so you don't kill him. Why? There's more to this story. And I'm going to I'll give you a hint. I think it's because I don't believe Cain was pure human. There was something more there. All right, so we got to leave the story off here. The rest of this story, remember I said this is called Cain and the Other People. So remember from here, the story in the Bible says God marks Cain, and he says Cain flees the region of Eden, and he runs to the land of Nod to the east, which is present-day Iraq. And by the way, I've got a little map. It's in the graphic I put up for tonight's show. You're not going to be able to call it up. Sorry about that. I'll try to make that available so you can take a look at it. But this, I show the map where the Bible says Eden would have lain and where the land of Nod would be. And it says that Cain went east to the land of Nod. As you're looking at me, it would be east, this way. But the way I'm looking at it, west, east, north, south, east to the land of Nod. And there he married a wife. And there he had a child with his wife. And he built a city and named the city after his firstborn son, which was Enoch. Not the same Enoch we talk about a little later in the Bible. So this is really easy. Yeah, land of Nod meant to go to sleep, Nigel. I remember that from when I was a kid. The land of Nod was in some of the stories we got read to us when we were kids. So my back right now, where I'm sitting, if you're looking at me for the sake of the image I'm creating, north would be here, south would be here, west and east. If you're looking at a map I would be holding up in front of me, the west would be here, the east would be here. But actually, I would say east. So where I'm sitting right now, north is that way. I'm in a diagonal here in my room. So let's see. Iowa says he's still here. Just listening. That's great. Oh, Kitten said that. Did God know how important this would be to the future supernatural episodes? Yeah, I wondered about that. I liked those episodes with Cain, by the way. And I think these are guys, as I've said before, the guys who wrote Supernatural had their finger on the pulse of something that is extra to the story, but unknown parts of the story, or the parts that aren't told as much, other mythologies involving those stories. So I'm going to leave off on that tonight. Cain has fled the region of Eden. He's got a mark on him so nobody kills him. Well, who's going to kill him if there's nobody else there? Here's the question. Cain says, surely people are going to recognize me and they're going to kill me. And so what does God say? God said, I'll put a mark on you so nobody kills you. Then he flees east and he builds a city there. Who's he building a city for? Himself? I'm going to build a city because someday I may fill it with people that I make with my wife. So there's a lot of unanswered questions. We're going to get into that tomorrow night. Cain and the Other People. I want to thank you for being here tonight. I want you to go over to streamingtalkradio.com. You can remember that. Those three words, streamingtalkradio.com. That's Rocky's website, and really by virtue of association, my website with him. It's got all the stuff for his shows. It's got all the stuff for my show, the professor's show, and Jeff Dougherty's show. You can go in there and hit all the links. You can go there and go to my Etsy page, Son of a Patriot, and buy stuff. Some of the shirts I design. You can go to my page, ScottAllenRoberts.com, I want you to go here. By the way, if you were here last night and or the night before, I'm sorry, and got to hear all about the tarot and see some of the readings, I want you to go over here. If you are interested in getting a reading, you can go to that link right there. ScottAllenRoberts.com/tarot.html. And you can click on a reading and I'll do some readings for you. So there we are for tonight, folks. Like this video on your way out the door. Invite other people to subscribe. And I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for giving me your time. In 20 minutes now, Rocky and I are going live on the Situation Room, and we'll see you there. Have a good night, folks. Thanks for giving me your time.